First match, and we're going to take you through a whole big story here, lots of talking. We're going to go from the very earliest origins of hurling and how it's kind of intertwined with Gaelic and Irish culture, all the way up till today, and actually we're going to talk about the future, tomorrow, which we're going to have the biggest hurling match, and through all this research we found out in the history of Butte, which is pretty amazing to have that happen. But tomorrow, the parade starts.
So make sure you take your ticket.
Free admission, that's right. Tomorrow the parade starts at noon. It'll be over by 1. We try to schedule the match at 1:45 to get everybody time to get up there, to tech, to get comfortable, to get your jacket, yeah, or whatever you may need and all that kind of stuff. So 1:45 tomorrow, Montana Tech, the big stadium, Alumni Coliseum. But while you're in town, Kim mentioned that Bob Boyle is so great. He's a huge help to the team and support and all that kind of stuff. But he kind of worked us in, and somehow you guys agreed to let us come up here and give a little talk. So I think I'm going to have Jema start off with kind of the old ancient history of it. So.
Yeah, and it's really ancient history. So if any of you hear us or others talk about hurling, there's two things that people kind of always refer to. And these are that it's a warrior sport, or a warrior game, or warriors played it. And the other is that it dates back to over 3,000 years ago. So some of the earliest known records of hurling were at the Tupton Games. And note that this is 1829 B.C., right? So this is almost 4,000 years ago. And these are actually thought to have inspired the current Olympic Games, okay? So these were a really, really big deal, and they were actually kind of in memory of the Queen, the Gaelic Queen Talta, after she died. She was, sorry, not a Gaelic Queen, a Gaelic Queen Talta. And after she died, around 1829 BC, they held these games right around the Feast of Lunasa. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Feast of Lunasa. You want me to move over, sorry.
Just a little good.
It's held on the 1st of August. And actually people would often gather in about the last 2 weeks of July, and they would hold, it was a real cultural kind of a deal. So they would have dancing, they would put on plays, and they would have a hurling match. And all this was in the run-up to the harvest season, so that's what it was, what the Feast of Lunasa was. And these games actually ran for almost 4,000 years, right up until 1169. And as we're moving forward, I'll tell you why they stopped in 1169 AD. All right, so it's a really, really old sport. And the other thing that I mentioned was that we always kind of talk about it in connection with warriors, right? And that's because, I don't know if you're familiar with Irish folklore, so like probably a lot of you might have heard of Finn McCool and his band of warriors in a Fianna. And the term Fiann actually means kind of soldier or warrior. For any of you who know our national anthem, the very first line, Shinna Fianna Fáil, right, soldiers are we. So Finn McCool was this kind of brave Irish warrior, very famous. This is him with the Salmon of Knowledge, if any of you know that story. I'm not going to dip into that one. But really I just brought this up because him and his band of warriors in Fianna were these really revered kind of warriors back in Gaelic Ireland, kind of pre-AD, back in BC times. And most Irish children have heard stories of the Fianna, and you had to do these amazing feats to just even be able to get into this band of warriors, like run through a forest without breaking a twig, you know, things like that, right? And what these guys do, their favorite pastime was to play hurling, because hurling was seen as this practice for battle, and if somebody had great prowess on the field of hurling, they were probably thought to have great skill on the field of battle. So, you know, throughout Irish history, hurling has always been entwined with this warrior code. And the next kind of folklore story I want to talk about is Cuchulainn. I'm sure many of you have heard of Cuchulainn. Pretty famous, right? You might know he was actually born Setanta, and his origins are a little bit murky depending on which historian you're reading, but he was born of a mortal woman, and he's thought to be the son of a god, but there's a couple of different possible fathers. One is actually Lugh, who the Feast of Lunasa was about. And after, he didn't have a mortal father in the picture, so he actually was raised by his mother and a kind of group of foster fathers, one of whom was King Conor, or Conchobar. And King Conor, from a young age, he lived at the fort of King Conor. still known as Setanta. And while he was there, he would play with the other young lads, and they would play hurling. And so this is kind of, again, another so well-known kind of folk tale at home, is that one day when he was playing hurling, King Conor was watching the game, but he had to leave early because he was going to a feast in his honour that was being hosted by his blacksmith, Cullen. And a blacksmith at the time was a really kind of a powerful, revered person in that society, right, because he made the weapons that they used to defend their homes or to go on raids to get money and power and wealth. So Conor had to leave early, but he said to Setanta, you know, I want you to come to this feast. Setanta said, I can't leave before can't walk off the pitch before the game is over. These games will go on for hours. So Conor said, well, just come after, I'll tell Cullen that you're coming. We'll leave the door open for you or something. So Conor went to the feast, and of course there was much kind of raising the glass in his honour. And as the sun started to set, they may have been a little bit under the weather or under the bottle. And Cullen, the smith, says to Conor, you're not expecting anyone else. You haven't invited anyone else. I'm gonna lock up. And Conor said, no, forgot all about poor Setanta still out on the hurling pitch. So Cullen locked the doors and put his ferocious guard dog, his hound, to defend the entrance to the keep. And this hound is supposed to be like shoulder high, really ferocious. Nobody wants to mess with this hound. So of course, Setanta, sun's going down. Eventually, the hurling game ends, and he makes his way down to the keep to join in the feasting. Hopefully, not too late. And all he has is his slitter, right, which is the ball that we play hurling with, and his hurl, his trusty hurl. So as he's coming up to the door of the keep, you can hear everything inside. It sounds like a great party. And suddenly, this slavering beast leaps at him, and he just instinctively drives the slitter straight at the beast, and it goes straight down the beast's throat, and so the beast chokes and dies, but not before making a horrendous racket, which draws all the people out from the feast. So Cullen comes out, and he's absolutely enraged, like this is his really precious hound that defends his home, So he's like, who are you, you boy, to come along and kill my dog? Like, how dare you? He wants his head. But Conor was like, oh, whoa, and Conor's like, this is my fault, I invited him, I forgot to tell you he was coming, you locked the doors. And so Setanta actually said, well, I'll rear you another dog like this one, I will, make it just as ferocious, but until I do, I will defend your home. And so that's how Setanta became known as Cú Cullen. Cú is hound of Cullen, the smith. So he was known ever after that, from his teen years, as Cú Cullen, and later he actually became known as Cú Ulla, or the Hound of Ulster, right, which is the northern province of Ireland, because he defended Ulster against a lot of its foes. So this is, one of the most prominent kind of Irish folk tales, and it features hurling, right? And this, you can see how prominent it is. This is actually just from a couple of years ago. It's a Guinness ad. They sponsor our National Hurling Championship every year. They've sponsored us for years. And they don't even have to put a name on it. Everybody who sees this in Ireland knows exactly what it's talking about. It's Cú Cullen, killing the hound. Okay. So this is some of the kind of pre-written history, actually. These were passed down for many years kind of as an oral history, and it wasn't until I think the 7th century AD that somebody actually thought we should write these down before they kind of disappear. But now, like I said, there's really nicely illustrated books that you just see anywhere you go in Ireland, and most kids will have heard these stories. So moving on, pointing the right way, the next kind of mention of hurling in Irish society that you hear is actually in the Breton Laws. I don't know if you've heard of the Breton Laws, but they were kind of pre-English occupation laws. They were ancient Gaelic laws, basically, that the Irish people lived by before the English came and occupied. And they're actually around from about the 5th century. However, we didn't know that these, after the English occupation, they kind of stopped being known about, I guess. They died out until the manuscripts were found again in the 1200s, so, which people were pretty excited about. And they're called the Breton Laws. This is actually a Breton right here. Breton was the term used to call a lawyer. And it wasn't like today where they stayed in a place and they worked in a court of law. They were actually wandering lawyers. So they didn't stay and have allegiance to one kind of town or village or community. They would wander the land, and it was known that they would come to this town on like the 4th Sunday, or what they probably knew this Sunday back then, but they would come at a certain time of the month or a certain time of the year, so that people would kind of save up their grievances, and the Breton would come around and apply the law, kind of solving these grievances that people had. And you know, for the 5th century, they were some of the laws were really ahead of their time. I think I've stuck a few of them up here. Like care for the elderly. Yes.
Was she a woman, the lawyer? The
No.
picture looked like a woman, that's why I asked.
You're dead right, actually.
That's wonderful.
She does. Well, so this is part of what I'm going to go through now. So some of the laws were seen as bizarre. Like we might think they're bizarre now, but they were really quite forward-thinking. When you become old, your family must provide you with 1 oat cake a day plus a container of sour milk. They have to bathe you every 20th night, which is quite frequent in the 5th century. And wash your head every Saturday, right? Lice were bad back then. And you get, 17 sticks of firewood to keep you warm. So, this was actually quite a forward-thinking society. I think we look back and tend to think of them as, living very rough, and maybe think of them as savages. But, they were pretty civilized for the time. Oh dear. This one, the first part isn't that it's just about a dowry, but I thought this was really forward-thinking for the time, that the wife retains her rights to all the land and household goods going into the marriage. And what's funny is that in later times, like in Elizabethan England, that came in when these were still in rule, they thought that the Breton laws were like so uncivilized, and they thought the Irish were savages. But they were the ones that held women as chattel, right? And we couldn't hold our property or anything. So these were really, really forward-thinking for the time. It was really cool. They had laws against rape. They had really, really kind of forward-thinking laws. But then they had funny ones like this. A husband who through listlessness does not go to his wife in her bed must pay a fine. What wife is going to bring that out to court to the Breton? And who does he pay the fine to? The wife or to the community? I'm not sure about that. But they had some funny ones. But the reason why I brought these up was because people were really excited when they found these in the 12th century. Because prior to this, all we had were these references in our oral history and our folklore tales to hurling. And of course we knew about the Tupton Games. But there were actually laws in the Breton laws specifically dealing with what happened if you were injured through hurling, how you were compensated if you couldn't work because you had been injured through hurling, what happened if somebody purposefully injured someone else on the field of play. Because it was a real dangerous game. Like, I think helmets were only introduced in the 1990s, right?
Oh.
Yeah, I remember playing when I was young and helmets weren't enforced. So, and we still don't have much padding or anything. So it was quite dangerous. And back then it was like anything went. There have been known to be deaths on the field. And these laws actually dealt with, what happened if someone died and like, what happened with their family, with their wife, their children, and things like that. And so that was the Breton laws. So remember I said earlier, and these were in effect right up until kind of the English came in and tried to impose their rule on Ireland at the time. So remember I said 1169 was really important because that was the Norman invasion. I don't know, some of you history buffs are probably like, it was 1066.
Yeah.
1066 was the Norman invasion of England. By 1169, England, of course, was ruled by Norman. It was Henry II or Henry de Plantagenet who was a Norman himself. And England was full of young kind of Norman nobles dying to make their name in battle and get land and money. And so, of course, they started to look to Ireland, right, because England was just full of them. And this is a very famous painting in Ireland, at least, the marriage of Strongbow and Aoife. And Strongbow was actually a Norman lord called Richard de Clare. Strongbow was obviously his nickname, with his very strong bow arm. Actually, no, I'm wrong, it might be because he had a lot of archers, so he was Strongbow. And this picture depicts, I'm sorry it's so dark, you can't really see it, but this is Strongbow, and this is Aoife, and Aoife was an Irish princess. Her father, Dermot the traitor, now he was a king of Leinster, and if you know, I should put a map up, but if you know your Ireland, you'll know Leinster is the province or region that's right over across the water from England on the east coast there. And he was the king of Leinster, and he'd actually been deposed by the High King of Ireland because he stole another king's wife, he kidnapped her. So he had been deposed, and he went seeking help to win back his rule, his land, and he went seeking help in England and invited several of these Norman lords over, the strongest of which was Strongbow and Robert de Clare. And he, at the time, so the Irish were still, following Irish law, the Breton laws, and it was illegal. Like, nobody would recognize the rule of these Normans to just come in, like, who were they, right? So he promised Strongbow, if he helped him win back his lands, he would give him his daughter Aoife his hand in marriage. So when Dermot died, he would actually inherit the kingdom of Leinster. So he would come by it legitimately, and the Gaels at the time the Gaelic people actually couldn't legitimately own it. But they did indeed go to battle, and that's what this picture depicts. Poor, kind of dead native Gaelic people. You can't see, but these are all the Norman soldiers up here, and there's Aoife, of course, with all her handmaidens being married. So this was in 1169, and within 3 short years, a lot of Normans had actually come over to the Leinster region, and they'd taken over, heard of the towns of Wexford, Waterford, and of course Dublin. So they were pretty much under Anglo-Norman rule, right? So English-Norman rule. But after about 3 years, there was so many Normans over there, and they were like gaining so much land and wealth and power that King Henry actually got worried that some of them, specifically Strongbow, probably would get too powerful and would actually come and threaten his throne. So he came over. I'm getting to the part about him. He came over to visit Waterford, to visit Strongbow, and to declare himself Lord of Ireland. So he claimed Ireland as a lordship under the English crown, right? Which was actually the first time in history that Ireland, according to the English, came under direct English rule. So this was the start of those 800 years of kind of English oppression in Ireland. And interestingly at the time, so Strongbow's kind of marriage in was really, really successful. So all of the Anglo-Norman lords started to do that, right? They started to come in. Rather than war with the natives, they tried to marry, and they kind of spread gradually out from the Leinster region across the country doing that. So initially in the 11 and 1200s, the Anglo-Normans, they really tried to impose English rule and English culture and stamp out the Gaelic culture, like they stopped the Breton Laws. And actually at this time it was the English that kind of split the country into the counties we know now, right, the 32 counties that we have now. And one of the things that they did, of course, was they banned hurling, because it was this, really strong kind of code of honor and warriors game that the Gaelic people played at the time. So they were like, you're not playing that. Like, we don't want you to have that strong kind of culture. And of course, also they were trying to impose their own language and they had their own sports that they brought over and played at the time. But this actually kind of, I won't say backfired on them, but over time, and surely by the end of the 1400s, all of those Norman lords that had spread over and married, there's only one of them, or however many of their men-at-arms they bring, but there was a load of Gaelic people. So over time, the Normans actually started to adopt the Gaelic people's culture. And by the 1400s, outside of that original region on the east coast, which I'm sure you all have heard the term was called the Pale, outside of there, where the English rule was strong and people observed English rule and played English sports and spoke English, everywhere else, including the places settled by these Anglo-Norman lords, was actually speaking Gaelic and following the Breton Laws and the Gaelic culture. And that's actually where the term, the people in the English region, the Pale, thought that the people outside it were just absolute wild and savages, and that's where that term outside the Pale comes from. I'm sure that term is still in use today. So they banned hurling, and that was the first kind of hurling ban by the English, but by no means the last. They've tried to ban various Gaelic games and of course the Gaelic language kind of throughout that 800 years. So let me see. So that brings us up then to things carried on kind of, like I said, over time. The Normans just married in, and when your kids are half Gaelic and then their kids are 3/4, and eventually the Norman was almost spread out. And so they're living and abiding by these Gaelic laws and speaking Gaelic. So outside the Pale, it was kind of back to being Irish. And right up until kind of the 17, 1800s actually, things just carried on in that way, living under the old kind of Gaelic rule. And in fact, the Norman lords were the ones that kind of promoted hurling, because they would arrange these big contests between kind of neighbouring communities or neighbouring holds, strongholds, and it generated a lot of wealth for them because people would come and there was a lot of gambling. You can picture it like kind of the old jousting tournaments that they would hold right in England, the Knights of Jousting. So that was these hurling tournaments. But then around the 1700s, 1800s, there was another, I mean, there was always these kind of waves, depending on what was happening back in England. They would send someone over that was going to sort out the Irish problem, you know. And they really tried to kind of stamp out again the Irish culture, the Irish language in the kind of 1700s, 1800s. And of course, I'm sure you've all heard of the famine, which was in the mid-1840s. And around about that time, I mean, the English didn't really actually have to do anything. That was a really dark time for the country. I think we say like a third of the population died, a third left, and a third stayed behind. And the estimates are actually about 2 million people left, and about 2 million people died. A lot of the people that left, of course, landed here on your east coast more so than way up here. So at that time, there was no spirit in Ireland to maintain the fights to try to keep things alive. So hurling and other kind of sports like Gaelic football and things like that really almost started to die out. Until kind of getting into the later 1800s, when, of course, you've heard of the IRB, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and the Fenians, the secret society that were dedicated to gaining Irish rule again, gaining their Irish independence. So they were trying to revive, in the Gaelic League, they're trying to revive the Irish language and stuff, and around that time, there was this man, Michael Cusack, a very determined man from County Clare. He was determined to kind of revive the Gaelic games. And he wanted to do it by they wanted to de-Anglicize Ireland, right? They wanted to bring us back to our roots. But he kind of wanted to do it by following the English way. The problem was that because English sports were so organized, and they had adopted like one way of playing, and they had laid down these rules, they were way more organized than any of the Irish sports were at the time. You found that a lot of the Irish people in the towns and cities near garrisons where the English soldiers were would just end up playing these things rather than the Irish sport. Because, for example, in hurling there was huge differences regionally in like the size of the pitch, the amount of players on the pitch, probably the types of hurl that you had, they would put them differently, they would play differently. So, you know, organizing games was a problem, and a lot of it had been forgotten, like I spoke during those dark years of the famine. So Michael Cusack, you know, really, really wanted to bring back these Gaelic games. So he basically pestered anyone he thought would help to do this. So he, you know, wrote to the people that he knew, that the public knew were involved in the IRB, or involved in the Fenians, and the Gaelic League, any of these people. And he got on board Maurice Davin, which at the time was a very famous Irish sportsman, although he was more famous for boxing and rowing. And he was from County Waterford, Carrick, I'm sure now, County Waterford. And he, you know, was like, yeah, we need to do this, we need to bring back Irish sports and unify them across the country, and get like national leagues going, you know, get them back into the community. And so they also found that the IRB and the Fenians were really, really on board with it too, because of course, bringing back these Irish culture helps to bring back the Irish language and helps to bring back the kind of pride in our nation, and so of course, kind of revives that fighting spirit that they wanted people to have. So Michael Cusack, by dint of pestering people by letter, and got support of the Catholic Church, a very sport-mad archbishop at the time, kind of threw his weight behind him, and the Catholic Church were very powerful then, of course. So he got seven people to meet in a hotel on November the 1st in 1884 in Thurles, the birthplace of the GAA. And there's a big stadium there now, Thurles is still pretty famous. And they sat down and they basically, you know, bashed out what would be the rules going forward for the 4 different Gaelic sports. So those sports, of course, were hurling, Gaelic football, camogie, which is the female version of hurling. Very, very similar rules, just a little less physicality. You know, they just go hard on the shoulder. I'm fighting to change that. I like the shoulders. Yeah. And then, of course, the last but not least is the handball, which is a very like squash, played in the ball alley, but it's just with a hand. So they sat down. They were really, really dedicated people, and they sat down. And within a few years, there was GAA clubs, Gaelic Athletic Association. We just call it the GAA today, but it's common luckless Gael, of course, in Irish Ross Gael. But within a few years, there was GAA clubs in almost every community all over Ireland, and it was thriving. And of course, it kind of fed back into each other, right? The IRB were delighted because they could go down to the local GAT club and know that they could recruit there, because people who were playing these Gaelic games were obviously feeling the Irish spirit and wanted to fight for their independence again. So it was a pretty exciting time, and I think here I'm going to hand over to Myles. So I'm leaving you in 1884.
1884, excellent. We're going to take it a little bit and we're going to move it over here to the other side of the pond and talk about Montana a little bit. In 1884, that wasn't that really long ago. You covered a lot of years there. That was fantastic, right? So here, we did some research into some old newspaper clippings from Butte and Anaconda. 1892, what's that, 8 years later, right? That's not much longer. I'm not the mathematician. But here we talk about, everyone here knows we had a large Irish population, a large culture. We already had very Irish societies here that are very established, right? Well, here it is, 8 years later. In Butte and Anaconda, they're going to put on a grand picnic, which picnics were just like anything else, like we're going to do tomorrow or tonight or anything else, right, for St. Patrick's Day. A gathering to keep your culture and keep your contacts together. But there's a program of sports, and right there, boom, Irish hurling match, Butte versus Anaconda. I don't know who I was rooting for, right? But the Gaelic Athletic Association rules. So from that little tiny hotel room in Thurles to 8 years later, boom, those rules have spread because of that culture we had sharing not just across the ocean, but geez, way out west, that's a long ways away from old Boston and New York where you get off the boat. They also had a football match, not like 49ers football. This is like Gaelic football, right? Gaelic Athletic Association rules. Here, we talked about the AOH Picnic, that same thing. They had two different dates. I'm pretty sure it's the same picnic, so I can see why some people miss them. But they talk about the hurling match played under the rules of the Gaelic Athletic Association again. And down here at the bottom, I know it's hard to read, the proceeds will go toward building a large hall for a local division. So thanks for having that little meeting way back there, because that is what became known as the Hibernian Hall in Anaconda, right? So 1892, Hibernian Hall was built between 1896 and 1899, and obviously is the bedrock of that Anaconda Irish Gaelic culture over there. So it's kind of fun how that kind of transcends. Hurling, right here, this is another 1895. Ireland's great game. This is a newspaper article. I wish I had the big paper, but this massive thing just about hurling. And it's kind of fun because there's some illustrations in here. Somebody actually wrote down how the hurling matches work. This is the throw-in to start the game. This is probably more of what we know of today as people getting beat up and knocked all over the place. Well, that is definitely some superior artwork to anything I could pull off. Do you mind her? Douglas Hyde he was a big leader of the Gaelic League, the GAA, the push for Irish nationalism. But of course, everyone knows Butte is one of the 5 pillars of Ireland back here, right? We have New York, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, and Butte. And so we had people traveling from Ireland here all the time, recruiting, contacts, fundraising. That's what it is, right? We had the minds, we had money here. Douglas Hyde came by, and he was really here promoting the athletic sport of it, because with that culture, we talk about culture as sports, language, music, and dance, right? Those are the big parts of the Irish culture there. And he gave a big rousing speech, and he was quite the orator, he was quite the leader here. This is a fun quote here. It says, philosophy of the Gaelic League is this, that Ireland cannot compete with England in the things that come naturally to England and that come naturally to us. Like, we cannot, for instance, we cannot play cricket as well as an Englishman. Laughter, right? Who wants to play cricket like an Englishman? Right? But sure, we can beat the world at hurling. And then he gets laughter and applause, right? Because that's a strength, that's a great. Upon our clay floors, we cannot dance the waltzes gracefully, but sure, we can smash them in a jig or a reel, right? Talk about the singing and all that kind of stuff. And at the very bottom, in one word, we aim at the de-Anglicization of Ireland. And that's why they came here, so that the folks and people of Butte can help fund that and make that grow back home. Here a little bit later, 1909, we're still pretty early on, but boy, Butte's really booming around right now, and we have an athletic club going. With an actual forming of a club here. We want our own Gaelic Athletic Sports Association. And it wasn't just like a few people, right? This is a big thing. We talked about the growth of it and how everyone's very excited about it. Here's the Anaconda Standard. This is the front page. Brawny lads of the Gaelic League, right? And people are proud of this. They're proud of their sports stars, which isn't just boxing, baseball, and horse racing. Not in Butte. In Butte, they had the Gaelic Leagues as well, right? Here was two little cutouts here. Hurling is the national game of the country, and it is safe to say that is by far the most exciting game played in the world today. I'd say that's still true, right? The hurler must be a born athlete with an eye as keen as an eagle's and his whole body as lively as a cat.
Well, we know that's true.
Exactly. Hurling is a fine art. It says, here's what the immortal Michael Cusack says of hurling that you just spoke of earlier. Is it a fine art? I think it is. I know of nothing except the Irish language that gives us more pleasure to those who take part in it, or to those who concentratingly observe it. So, it's a big part of it. They like to play up the excitement of the sport, right? Here's again in the Butte Intermountain, there's just a big, more tales of the Irish games and vogues. They have the newspaper, obviously a reputable source, right? Talking constantly about how exciting this is and promoting it. But there's here just talks about I don't know if you guys can read that one there, but the sport of hurling and all that kind of stuff. Over here it talks about Gaelic sports in Chicago, which was a real hotbed there. There are 7 football teams, 5 hurling teams in Chicago. And this summer, scarcely a Sunday goes by without seeing a game at each sport at this Gaelic Park in Chicago, which New York has a Gaelic Park as well, right? Chicago Gaelic Park, and you might hear more about that later. In 1911, again, the Butte Daily Post. This is a little bit harder to read up there in the corner. The Gaelic Athletic Association is established June 5th, 1911. We have our own Gaelic Association here. At the bottom, we even have Gaelic football. There's a lot of Gaelic football being played. Down here's the schedule of events there. So we had the Wolf Tones. Butte not only had a Gaelic football team, Butte had a Gaelic football league that had numerous teams, right? Which is great. The Wolf Tones, the Shamrocks, and the Emmets, this is their schedule. They're, as in Robert Emmett, they're all from Butte. The Emeralds were from right down the road in Anaconda. Rivalry, all the time. They play up at the, oh my gosh, the Columbia Gardens. So not only was there football going on, but everyone knows on the weekends that was the place to be. So it was just another spectacle to be added to the Columbia Gardens there. They had field day prizes, picnics. Even in 1912, later on, we don't really have the hurling team. We have a lot of Gaelic football, but hurling's around for sure. Here, just for the long distance hurling puck, as far as you can strike one of those balls. Heck, you could win. First prize is $5, second prize $3. It's a lot of money back then, right? But they advertise that, say, hey, you guys know hurling, come on down, check this out. This is in Gregson, Gregson, Fairmont area there. This is halfway between Butte and Anaconda, right? It's a nice meet-up area. They always have buses running and that kind of stuff for transportation. The Gaelic League sponsored all kinds of things here. They're a big part of the Irish culture here. 2 marathons. I hope they were back-to-back. That's crazy, right? 2 marathons sponsored by the Gaelic League. But again, there's football and hurling, right? The footballs and hurling balls would be at the disposal of the picnickers, so no formal games, but there's hurling there. Gaelic football was definitely far more popular than you. World War I, things kind of corrupted up and got a little busy and crazy, and soon after that, the Gaelic football leagues kind of tailed off and kind of disbanded, I guess we could talk about. 1932, I really like this old paper here, talk of reviving Gaelic football in Butte. Game enjoyed big support in the old days. Well, the old days wasn't that long ago, but then, but they talked about the support there. Now, Gaelic football is kind of like hurling, same rules, same concepts, everything, but instead of a hurley and a slitter, they use basically a soccer ball. So I think the question is, well, how come Gaelic football is so big in Butte and not hurling? Well, Gaelic football, to play, let's think what you need. You need some goalposts, right, a field, and that kind of stuff, and you need a football, or like a soccer ball, right? Everyone can play. For hurling, you need a slitter, right? You need one, well, these get lost or destroyed. So you need maybe a backup slitter. And everyone needs a hurl, or hurl, whatever you want to call it. Hurls are made of ash, an ash tree. It's a hardwood. And you can see, there might be a better example, but the grain of the wood comes down, and it kind of flares out, because that's where you strike the ball, the boss of the hurley. When it breaks, because they do break, they usually break along the grains of the wood. Well, some break in other places, but normally that's where the breaks happen. Montana, we're a little bit drier climate, I think we can all agree on, than Ireland, right? Montana, we also have cold winters, if you hadn't noticed, and we have hot summers. And so that really takes a toll on these things. So when you have the clash of the ash, when people strike these things together, the hurleys really don't last. Now if we think of the Irish coming over from Ireland, most of the time they really weren't the well-off ones that packed their big suitcases and everything, right? They come over there openly recruited by Marcus Daly and those as such, to come over here for a better life, right? So they pack up what clothes they have. You hear the stories of the small children placed on the boat with just a picture of the 7 stacks of the Never Sweat, right? And then they get off in New York and they're like, oh, that guy's going to Butte, strip him on the bus. Right? So they don't have a lot. And if you're going to bring stuff, am I going to pack these things to take on that 3-week journey to my new home? No, this is staying home, right? To make a hurley, there's actually the Irish Guild of Ash Hurley Makers. So this is it's an ancient craft to make these. Yeah, thank you.
Wow.
So you can't just like go pick one up, right? Now, why didn't we have teams here? Because they didn't have the tools. We had a few of these around that we could play with at the picnics, at the social gatherings, all that kind of stuff, right? But to field 2 teams where 15 people on each team could each have a hurley, well now I can understand why we don't have teams of them. And honestly, they break. I mean, once they break, they're tough to fix. And this is a great picture here. This is an old man hurley maker. I don't know why all the hurley makers are over 60 years old in these pictures, but they all are. And they make hurleys, right? They all make hurleys out in their barn and all that kind of stuff. Every hurl it's stamped by who makes it. So you know that there's a craft. You know who made it. They take pride in it, right? It's like a piece of art. There's a lot of history behind that. There's a lot of ash trees in Ireland, but there's not a ton of ash trees in Ireland, right? So we did some research, and some of the funny stories is they're replanting a bunch of ash forests, they're trying to thin them out, because to make a couple of hurls, I think you can only get 10 to 15 hurls out of a tree that's 30 years old. So it takes some time to make these. And they run out of wood, and I've always blamed that on the English to come over and they chop down all the trees, and took the lumber and all that kind of stuff. But the Irish, a lot of the hurley makers, they actually have to import the wood now, and they look to somewhere close. A good example, Poland, of all places, is just forested with ash trees. And they're like, wow, okay, so we started taking a bunch of ash trees over, cutting them down, shipping over to Ireland, so the hurley makers had something to make their hurleys out of. But they started busting up all the saws because, I don't know if you remember, but World War II, the Germans and the Russians, Poland was littered with ammunition. And there's all this old ammo and bullets and shrapnel and all the wood. And now it bust up all the saws. So they're like, well, no more Polish ash, right? Now they get most of the ash actually coming from southern Sweden and Denmark, and then they grow their own homegrown ash as well. So it's kind of a fun little story there. Nowadays, it's a little bit different because we now, in 7 days, I just punch some stuff into a keyboard and give them my credit card number, and I can have hurley shipped right to my front porch. So technology is amazing, isn't it? I mean, it's a great deal. And so now we have the ability to field teams with the tools that they need. And that's a huge deal there. And I think we'll kind of skip right ahead. I know we're kind of running short on time. But boy, I don't think the next slide, 2013, we had 2 students come over. Oh! Hurleys, we talk about hurleys, is kind of a symbol of Gaelic, of Irish culture, pride, right? So when people, I don't know here, the greatest sport, this guy here, he called himself the greatest, that's Muhammad Ali. He was over there, they showed him how to handle a hurley. That's Joe Biden, our old vice president, right? And they can't give a hurley to him. This soccer fans, or the girls might know this, that's Cristiano Ronaldo, right? So sports stars. People, whenever they go try this sport is such a curiosity, so amazing to watch that these sports stars, they want to try their hand at it.
We
and
just
the Irish
force anyone who visits to take them around.
Right, you have to. That guy looks familiar. That's President Obama. The hurling fan, I'm going to call him. He knows how to handle a hurl right there. But yeah, so it's a fun thing that I've totally gotten into these last few years and love every minute of it. But bringing it kind of a little bit closer to modern times, 2013 we had 2 students come over from Ireland. One was a Fulbright scholar. Oh!
Skipping a little bit ahead, we were just going to bring it back to Ireland.
Oh yeah, you did. Take this over here.
This is just a quote I found that really sums up, I hope, the kind of feeling about hurling in Ireland. Most Irish people, how we feel about not just hurling, but our Gaelic games.
Wow.
So the GAA is more than a sports organisation, it is a national trust. an entity which the Irish feel they have in common. It is there to administer their shared passion. They are the unifying and identifying force throughout the country, and the games are the thread that runs in all of their lives. There is a GAA club in almost every single community in Ireland. Sometimes they only have Gaelic football, sometimes they only have hurling, depending on the regions what's favoured. But they're there, and they're not just a sports team or a sports club. They really are about community, and it's about kind of pride in your community, pride in your nation. Right up to this day. This is our national stadium, Croke Park, and it's actually the third biggest stadium in Europe. It's bigger than most of the American football stadiums here. It seats 82,000 people, and it is filled every first Sunday, or every third Sunday in September for our All-Ireland final, county final.
Wow.
Okay, so there's an All-Ireland championship every year at the county level. And it's not a professional sport, although the people who play it they've actually done scientific studies where they tested like their lung capacity and their fitness, and they're comparable to professional athletes who don't do anything but play their sport, right? Whereas these guys, they train 3 to 4 times a week, they play these matches, and then they also hold down jobs. Many of them are teachers, many of them work in banks, so they're lucky they get to kind of sit down, but some of them hold physical jobs. And then they also do this really intense training on top for absolutely no remuneration. They're not paid, and they only play for where they're from. So it's really about pride, right? I'm giving myself the shivers there. I hope I'm giving you the shivers. And my brother plays for Dublin, where I'm from, so yeah. So as Myles said, at home after the foundation of the GAA, it really spread like wildfire in Ireland and through some parts of the United States. And right now, it's absolutely thriving. Just last 2 or 3 years ago, they signed a deal to put it on Sky Sports. I don't know if you know it or have it here, but it's kind of like maybe Europe's version of ESPN. It's a major kind of sports station, and they started to show it in England, and it's like in the UK and across Europe, and it's gained huge popularity. At first, people were like, "Oh my God, there's no rules. What are they doing?" But it's gaining in popularity. There are teams in Dubai. There's now like world championships in hurling and Gaelic football, and it's thriving here in the States. It's slowly but surely kind of growing outside of those regions, those 5 kind of Irish hubs that Myles talked about earlier, right? It's growing outside of there, and it's growing here in the Northwest. And how it started here in Montana was in 2013. University of Montana is very lucky to get a Fulbright scholar, 1 or 2 every year, to come over and teach Irish at the university. The Irish department at the University of Montana is like the 2nd largest in, I think, the Western United States, only behind Chicago, one of the big universities in Chicago. So Nisha came over, and this is Nisha over here in the far left. And Nisha is absolutely hurling mad. He hails from Kenny. This is their flag right there. This is one of those counties that only plays one of the sports, and it only plays hurling. Like they're hurling crazy. They have absolutely, they've won something like, I want to say 13 out of the last 18 All-Ireland finals right in that big stadium I just showed you. And he used to play with them up until the age of under 21. So he came over here to teach Ireland and was like, I can't go a whole year without playing hurling. And with him was his friend, this is Brian Barry here, and he was over he's over on an exchange from University College Cork every year. They get 2 law and Irish studies students, every semester actually 2 of these students play. And Brian was over, and he's from Dublin where I hail from, he's also hurling mad. And so these 2 guys were like, right, we're not going the year without playing hurling. So they said, we're going to start a hurling team. And basically their first recruits, these bunch of lads, were just Nisha teaching his Irish class, and then he would be like, well, you know, wait a little bit after class, I want to show you something. He would show them a clip of hurling and say, does anybody want to play? And just going around campus with his hurl and slitter and trying to garner some interest in the sport. And a local man, Terry, or Turbo McEnany, as we know, you might know him, I think he's been up here a few times, and people might know him. And he's just a retired gent who loves Ireland. He's, you know, of Irish descent himself, and he paid to get shipped over the first shipment of hurls and slitters and helmets that they had, and started us off in that very first year. So we were just established in 2013, and there is a national collegiate Gaelic Athletic Association in the States, not going for that long. I think it's in its 8th year this year, maybe 9th. But Nisha sought them out, said, you know, we want to take part, we want to come along. So he got invited along to the Nationals in May of 2014. They're always used to be held on, I'm going to get this wrong, is it Memorial Day in May or Labor Day?
Memorial Day.
Memorial Day, okay. It was always held on Memorial Day. But, so first of all, he got in touch. There's actually a division here in the Northwest. There are teams, hurling teams in Seattle, in Portland, in Tacoma, in Benton, and in Willamette. And he got in touch with those guys and was like, we started a hurling team, we don't even have a full team yet, but we want to come out and play. And those guys were like, come over, we'll throw you a few subs. Like, that's awesome that you're starting a team over in Montana. So, you know, they did a few kind of 8 to 10 hour drives that year, but they got to play. And they actually won their very first Buffalo Cup over in Willamette, which shocked all of the guys in the Northwest. They're like, I don't know if we want these guys over again. And then, of course, in 2014, we were very lucky. We got to go to New York to play in Gaelic Park in New York. And it was actually the centennial year of Gaelic Park, that Gaelic Park was invented over there. So it was really, really special. And we went, and we won in our very first year. I wish I could say that we won every single game by keeping them scoreless, but I believe that when 2 teams scored on us, the rest